Hello guys, I wanted to send a video for 3.4 to 3.6, so I'm covering three different subsections of Unit 3. Make sure that you read over the goals of each of the subsections before moving on, or at the very end you can refer back to the first slide and make sure you cover the information that you are supposed to understand for that specific section, okay? So let's start with carrying capacity, even though we already mentioned carrying capacity on previous videos, and I'm sure you've seen them in previous classes. Let's just focus on where we are right now. So recapping from the last week, we're going to have that the study of populations is done by demography, right? And there are dynamics for these populations. Dynamics means that there are going to be changes in the size of the population, in the density, dispersion, and the age structure. So the sizes are going to change for populations depending on factors that affect the population growth. Density, we already talked about density, how it is the number of individuals per area or per unit area. The dispersion, we talked about three types of dispersion here. And then in 3.6, we're going to talk about age structure. So that's going to be also covered in this video. Just a little formula, growth rate is going to be, or rate of natural increase is going to be the birth rate minus the death rate. But usually there are other factors affecting that. Here is another beautiful picture that will show you, we're going to get back to this picture in a moment, and how population density stays in a specific amount because of a biotic potential of the individuals or the population in general, and then some environmental resistance that the population has. Okay, so just remembering how populations are measured are going to be by density, so you can count the number of individuals in an area by counting all the individuals in a population, or you can estimate it by the sampling method. So you can see over here the quadrats being used for sampling for this population, or you can do the mark and recapture method. I'm sure you've seen this method in biology as well. But as you can see, there is a mark and recapture method being used for different species. And it has shown some effectiveness in the way that they recount the population and can study the effects of the number of individuals in that population. How do they grow? How do populations grow? There are two models. Again, those are ideal models. They don't really grow like that, but in terms of test information, this is what you need to know. Okay, so what is carrying capacity? Carrying capacity is going to be the maximum population size that can be supported by the available resources. Available resources examples are going to be what the ecosystem offers to that population. And again, that's going to determine the number of organisms that will be living or will be part of this population. So for example, if everything would be ideal, all the populations will have this exponential growth. But because we have this carrying capacity, which is the availability of that ecosystem to support this population, that population will somehow reach a maximum point because of the amount of resources. So we're going to look at this in detail. Okay, so how do they come together, the carrying capacity with the population dynamics? How does the carrying capacity determine the change of population numbers? So usually they're going to be kept in check because this equilibrium will be given by all the environmental resistance that is given by the ecosystem. So that will be kind of a balance between the births and the deaths. So that will keep the population in check. But this is always changing. It's not static. So it's going to be a dynamic balance between the biotic potential and the environmental resistance. So just reminding you, we talked about biotic potential last week, but biotic potentials are going to be any kind of factors that will help the population to increase in numbers. Usually will help the population increase to its maximum potential, right? But also environmental resistant are going to be the ones, the factors that affect that population from overgrowing. Okay, so there are some factors that will contribute to this biotic potential. So examples of these factors could be abiotic factors such as light or temperature, in which those organisms or that population develops better. And biotic factors could be the reproductive rate of that population or the ability of that population to migrate, even to adapt to changes in the environment. And the environmental resistance will be everything against it, right? Like unfavorable amount of light or temperatures in a specific condition or specific conditions for those populations. And biotic contributing factors would be like low reproductive rate, maybe they are specialized or have a specialized niche, or they cannot migrate. Again, adaptations are important. Okay, so going back to this diagram that I presented, is population density is going to be kept in check because of the biotic potential factors and the resistance or the environmental resistance factors. So you can pause the video and take a look and make sure you understand this. Okay, so when a population exceeds its carrying capacity, there is something called overshoot. So these overshoots will occur. And these overshoots have an effect, have an impact on the growth of the population. So these environmental impacts will help the population or will affect the population sometimes to a point where they cannot recover from these overshoots. Even these overshoots will cause some resources to be depleted. So let's take a look at this. In a diagram, an overshoot will be represented as any kind of curve that goes above the carrying capacity for that population. Sometimes, because of these overshoots, the carrying capacity lowers for that population as well. Okay, so let's look at this diagram over here. So if we have populations such as the R-selected species, right? When they have these overshoots in their populations, what's going to happen is the original carrying capacity that it has can be reduced to a lower carrying capacity because they have probably lowered the amount of resources. There can be some damage to the population. So if there is some damage, what's going to happen is because of high damage, the carrying capacity will stay lower for the rest of the lifetime, if we would say that, for that population. Sometimes that overshoot doesn't affect or somehow lets the resource to be recovered, so that low damage would allow the population to continue having its original carrying capacity. But if the damage is extreme, then the population will die out, will disappear. Now, these overshoots will lead towards the dieback, which is usually catastrophic or often catastrophic because the resources won't be there for that population. So that is really hard for a population to recover, such as famine, disease, or any other kind of conflicts that population might have. So it's not okay to have those overshoots. However, they are common in populations. Okay, so another example of overshoots and diebacks, again, overshoots is when a population exceeds its carrying capacity, and dieback is when they have reached that point, they are going to decrease in numbers, and it depends on how damaged the resources, they will change or not change their carrying capacity or die out or die back, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about booms and busts on a population, also known as the J-curve. But remember, if in ideal conditions, the biotic potential will make any population grow in a J-curve, but that's not true. Most populations have this cycle of booms and busts during their lifetime, but in general, they reach this equilibrium. I have shown you this picture over here in the previous presentation, again, representing the R-selected species and how they have these, like grasslands, right? Like grasslands have these grasses that can take over a very vast area in a very short amount of time, and then they die. And then in a different season, they grow back again and so on. So for them, they are not affecting their environment. They are not depleting our resource. It's just seasonal. So that leads to these booms and busts. And then the K-selected species is mostly, they just maintain their carrying capacity. Okay, so another picture of carrying capacity will show again this biotic potential that all the populations have, but will be regulated by the carrying capacity. So the carrying capacity is determined by all these factors, right? The environmental resistance that we talked about. So there are some examples over here for those factors. Okay, that was 3.4. Let's go to 3.5. So 3.5, population growth and resource availability. Let's start with resource availability. So because we're growing in very large numbers and at a very fast rate, we're going to have less resources available and less space available, right? You can recognize that picture over here. Um, Also, the resources such as water will not be available for as the population grows. Again, that's going to be also affected by the number of populations that we have and the type of populations. As you can see, we have the R and the K populations over here representing their growth, and how if this wouldn't happen, they would pretty much overpopulate the world, but that doesn't happen because we know there are factors in check for these type of populations. Okay, so going back to your favorite type of graph, okay, if we have individuals or populations from one species, right? So one population, let's say a species A. Let's say these two are birds or any type of populations that eat one of the resources. In this case, we're going to take seeds. So if we have two species eating this resource, right, or taking advantage of this resource, what's going to happen is, depending on the competition, depending on if they are weaker or stronger competitors, they are going to overtake the population, the resource that's available, and then they will drive the other population out, or they might share the resource on resource partitioning. So it depends on the location. So the more that they affect the resource availability, right, for individuals of species B, the more they will drive species B out of their realized niche. So if the differences in the resource are very large, then there is competition and they can coexist. But if not, then one of them will have to die out. Okay, now again, resource available means I'm gonna allow population to grow. I'm gonna let population to grow to the maximum growth that they can have. So over here, over history, we have seen that we humans, right, we have growth after the industrial revolution and modern medicine. Our population has grown very rapidly because there are resources available, there is better healthcare, and there is supposedly food available, even though this is not equally distributed. Okay, what happens if we exploit our resource base? What happens when the resources are changed? Then the population is gonna shrink. It's gonna become smaller. Then that would increase mortality. It's gonna decrease the amount of babies make, right? So that is gonna make the population decline below its carrying capacity, like we've seen on the graphs before. You can just stop and read this a little bit if you want to. Again, population growth depends on the birth rates, death, immigration, immigration. So the formulas would be the total population growth, or the population growth would be the starting of the population plus the births plus immigration minus the deaths plus immigration. Now, zero population growth is when you have an equal amount of births plus immigration, or when births plus immigration equal death plus immigration. We're going to have some calculations done at, with a worksheet in class. So I will give you the formulas that you need to know for that one. There are different formulas in which people calculate population growth, but we're going to focus on the ones that are used for apes. Okay, so population growth, there are two types of growth. There is the exponential and logistic growth. So let's analyze each one. So exponential growth, there is some history here that will explain you. This is not a new thing, right? Even Darwin noticed this, and all the species have the availability to have this exponential growth. But that doesn't happen because, again, resources availability. He even used elephants as an example, and he gave this example of elephants in one of his books. So exponential growth is going to be characterized by a rapid growth. It's going to have a J-shaped curve. We're going to see that represented on a graph. J-shape doesn't mean a linear curve, by the way. And that happens when that population will have plenty of resources to grow, and there's not going to be environmental pressures that will limit that population growth. Usually that happens with invasive species, and it also happens with us, with humans. Okay, logistic growth is going to be that, again, some information about it, but it's going to be mainly rapid growth at the beginning, but then it's going to level off at its carrying capacity, and it will stay there. It will kind of be stable. We can see that on the case-selected species. Once it reaches the maximum number of individuals, that's going to just stay there unless there is something else that happened to that population. So this is also known as a sigmoid curve, okay, and it's gonna depend on the reproductive rate of the population. Again, and if something affects the population, like we're gonna see it in a moment, then that could change as well. Okay, so what factors can limit that population growth? There are two types of factors: density dependent, which will depend on the density of the population, on the number of individuals per unit area, right? Such as the amount of resources or a disease that attack the population or predation. But other factors affect population growth no matter how big or how small the population is, such as a natural disaster. If there's a natural disaster and it's going to wipe out a population, it doesn't care about how big the population is or not. Therefore, that's a density independent factor. Okay, so I was telling you about the booms and the busts or busts. So we have an example that we've seen before for these snowshoe hare and the lynx. So that is one of the examples that shows those booms in which one of the populations increase and then the busts in which the populations go down. But again, they keep each other in check. There is another example over here between the moose and the wolves. It's going to be different. It's not going to be the same for different populations. So it's just two different graphs that will show you the booms and the busts. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure. Okay, human population growth is going to be shown as a J curve. Usually this is the growth rate of human population. And the reason why we don't have that resistance, or that resistance is not being seen as effectively as in other populations, even though we are K-selected, is because we're altering our environment. We have some technology that will help us to increase the resource use that we have. And because we have this industrial medical revolution happening that is allowing us to overcome our amount of resources that we have. So those are some reasons why. Okay, so the last one is the age structure diagrams. We're going to do a second lab this week in which we have to know this. If we don't start it tomorrow, we'll start it on Tuesday. And if you don't see another video tonight, this would be the only video for Monday. And then if I post another one for tomorrow on campus, on campus, you can watch it for Tuesday. It's not required for Monday. Okay, so the age structure diagrams, you've probably seen them as well, but will show the distribution of male and females at each age group in a population on a given area. So it could be a country, it could be a region, it could be a continent. So it depends on the study that you want to use. So it's going to tell you the different bands on the population. Usually it takes 5 years in between. So as you can see on this side, you can see the ranges of age. We're going to look at data for what population with different age ranges. And we'll practice this with a lab. So anyway, this will tell you a lot of information about population growth depending on the age ranges, and how some of these sections will represent some baby blooms and all that, or booms. Okay, so again, these type of population diagrams are also known as histograms or population histograms, and that will show the population and how it grows to the different ages at a certain point. Such as here, right, we have Nigeria, or any developing country is going to have the shape of a diagram for the age population diagram. We also have the developed countries that have this kind of population age diagram, and how other ones have just other kinds of diagrams. So let me explain this in detail. So populations that have a high birth rate will have a very broad base over here. They are gonna show not a lot of older people. And then you see that this age, 15 and 65, will be the one that represents the reproductive age for this population. So this reproductive age means that people that are able to reproduce successfully in that population. So for developing countries, it's going to be that not many people reach older ages compared to, let's say, a developed country, in which we can see more people reaching older ages as well, but we also have a lot of birth rates, and we're gonna see that again there is a larger population in reproductive ages because we have had a lot of babies being born here. So it's gonna move up as we go. So this shape will represent that we are having an older age people, or people that reach older stages in larger numbers compared to countries that don't have that kind of population. So it kind of gets oval, as you can see. So in this one, we do not have a very wide base, or we don't consider this to have a very wide base. And as we move forward, even this one kind of starts growing from the inward side of it. That means the low birth rate is happening, so there is less babies being born, right? But we see that there is a lot of population that reaches these older stages compared to the previous examples. So again, let me give you this with examples of countries. So for example, some of the developing countries that are on this kind of stage 1 will be developing countries. We have some developed countries like the United States that have this kind of diagram. Then we have the zero growth for some of the other developed countries. And then we have some negative growth, which means there's not a lot of babies being born, such as in these countries over here, right? Okay, if you want to take a look at what each of the sections mean, you can pause the video and take a look at how do we represent these age-based diagrams. Okay, so for the United States, there is an example here. So how do these age diagrams tell us, or what can we know about populations from these diagrams? So for example, if we looked here, we can see that at first there is not a difference between male and females and in number, right? But we can also see that women are living longer as they age, so they are actually reaching an older age at a higher rate, or not at a higher rate, but in bigger numbers. So we do have more women living longer. We also have these kind of booms over here, or boomers. These baby boomers happened. For example, this one will be people that after World War were having more babies after the war. So they would be people that are in their 60s already. So these bubbles on the diagram, on the age diagram, will represent these baby boomers over here. And the millennials, what are the millennials like me over here, right? So not a lot of babies. All the millennials are over here. You can see that there is no baby boomers for the millennials over here. So again, from an age diagram, you can determine different factors about a population. So if we have a population that's growing very fast or very rapidly, we're going to have a lot of younger people compared to a population that is more stable, or a population that is declining. Okay, so then we have to talk about population momentum. So if there is a lot of babies that are being born, if that shows in a stage at some point, remember that a reproductive age that I showed you before, between 15 and 65, well, that will cause something that's called a population momentum, which means that the population is going to experience a high growth rate. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a high fertility rate. It's just that the population keeps on reproducing because they are on a fertility rate band between 15 and 65. So take a look at this diagram. You can pause the video and you can study a little bit. So we can see that the total population, like the 100, 200, and 400, make a population of 700. So even though we do not have the fertility rate going up in this case, you can see that it's even declining because there is a large population that is under 18, will allow for the next generations to have people that are fertile, that are reproductively able to have babies, right? So they will still show or help the population to increase. So that is called the population momentum. Okay. Then some factors that you need to know for the test are the world population, how many we are, what are the top countries with the amount of population or with the number of individuals, and just some factors that it would be useful to have from the population, the growth per continent up to 2018. And look at this over here. Take a look, and then our next topic, 3.7, will be fertility rate, and we'll discuss more about this over here and see if that's true or not. Okay, that has been it for these 3 sections.